Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith, and on the line with Dave Anderson, co-host. Dave, how are you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Hockey playoffs are here, NHL. But this is a tennis podcast.
It is.
I don't.
But it is sports. Sports are sports.
I don't watch hockey very much during the year. I mean, you'd watch it every night. It's just so time consuming. Somebody who we worked with, who spent time at your place, plays at Dartmouth now. Malhar Patel, he sent me a text. He was at his first ever hockey game. It was Dartmouth versus Clarkson. Clarkson, that's my hometown, Potsdam, New York. And
yeah, great hockey.
I think in many times when I lived in Tampa 15 years, I would take kids to watch the Lightning. Yeah, in tennis, our outcry is we've got to get a little bit tougher. It's such a difficult sport from a technical standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a collision sport. It's not certainly a contact sport. It's a non-contact sport. With that, let's get rolling. Why don't you read that letter, and then we'll get the story rolling with that. I think our listeners will want to be part of this.
Yeah, here we go. The Malagasy Tennis Federation is taking a major step forward in its development today by proudly announcing a strategic partnership with GreatBase Tennis Education founded by Steve Smith. This partnership is driven by a clear ambition to sustainably elevate the level of tennis in Madagascar by addressing its foundation, training, and education. From now on, parents, players, and coaches will have access to a world-class educational resource, internationally recognized for the quality and depth of its approach. GreatBase Tennis Education is a nonprofit organization that provides free access to unique educational content with a simple yet powerful mission to help everyone play and teach tennis better. At the origin of this initiative is a vision that dates back to 1981. At that time, Steve Smith led an innovative university program dedicated to training tennis instructors. For nearly a decade, he developed a revolutionary approach combining theoretical instruction with intensive practical immersion through a weekly 15-hour laboratory. This experience gave rise to a structured system built on the observation and analysis of the game's greatest experts. The system's foundation draws on major figures in world tennis, including Vic Braden, Dennis van der Meer, Welby Van Horn, Peter Burwash, Harry Hopman, Jim Lair, Jim Burdick, and Bill Jacobson. At the heart of this method lies a fundamental principle inherited from Vic Braden. Tennis is not about style, but about laws. The dimensions of the court and the physical realities dictate stroke production. Understanding this means entering a whole new dimension of the game. This system has already helped develop hundreds of juniors, college, NCAA, and professional players, as well as many high-level coaches. Among them are players ranked on the WTA and ATP Tour, as well as key contributors to the development of tennis globally. Today, this expertise is becoming accessible in Madagascar. In the coming weeks, educational short videos will be released to share the fundamentals of the GreatBase system. The objective is clear: to build a shared culture, raise the level of understanding of the game, and develop a new generation of players and coaches who are better trained and more knowledgeable. This partnership is more than just a collaboration. It is a transfer of knowledge and acceleration, a new era for Malagasy tennis. Thank you. Nomina?
Yes, I believe so.
Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yeah, let's go forward with that. I believe so. I believe that she is the one who should get credit for that. Is well written. Let me go through my notes. Episode 298, Power of Story. I certainly think this would be one way to start a book. My son Connor, having played at Ohio State, like how Ohio State is introduced by the Buckeye Nation as the Ohio State.
Yeah.
It would be nice to have the tennis book. Anyway, everything has a beginning. Every story has a beginning. The story of our mentors goes way back. The 8 pillars, the story of tennis history goes way back. But just this story, it's interesting. Let me say this, for this to work, and we've had a lot to do with tennis clubs, for example, tennis associations, college programs, and for it to work, the person at the top has to say, okay, this is the direction we're going to go. I'll just go with first names. One of the trio, Dali, she is in a leadership position with Madagascar, Tennis Madagascar. She was top 50 in the world. She won 10 titles. Was a 3-time Olympian, flag bearer for her country, played with her sister, taught by her father. And 2 other members of the trio, you've met one of them, Nomina.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ina and Nomina, the 3 as childhood friends, the young girls, they started hitting tennis balls in Madagascar. Now, Ina and Nomina both went on to play Division I college tennis here in the U.S. Nomina, she played, and this is where you come into the story and so many others, she played tennis at the University of Texas. Now, people could listen to her on our podcast. It's called the Madagascar Longhorn. It's a great story where she won the last match out for her team to advance to the finals. But when she played on the women's team, 2 players on the men's team, Clayton Stanley and Chad Clark. So for our listeners, going way back to that lab in 1981, I met those young players, Clayton Stanley first and Chad Clark shortly after. But Nomina had the intellectual curiosity. She observed. She never found out why at that time, but those 2 young players or teammates, I shouldn't say they weren't on the same women's team, but fellow Longhorns, had all-court tennis games. So I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. I've read several of his books, but that's one book, maybe the only book I can think of where I read the last page and I immediately started reading the first page again. Should have done that with all the textbooks that were put on my lap when I was a student. But the story of success, the story of circumstance. So you actually went with me. It was 33 years ago that you and I went to help a classmate, Richard Hernandez, who's also been a guest on our podcast. So you and I went. We didn't make videos for everybody at the Richmond Hill Country Club, but almost everybody. So it's really interesting, 33 years later. So then from that, Miran Man, who was, when we went there, he was in the 12 and unders. So now, I say, for example, he was younger than 12, and I'd say now he's older than 42. So I guess maybe that 33 years adds in.
Yeah.
But with that, Nomina, and just like Ina has a son who plays really well, Logan. And I think players like that will end up being, for sure, visual demonstrators with this project. It's one thing to hear, it's another thing to see it. So Nomina is just watching tennis, and just like any parent wants what's best for her child, and this project is what's best for children. So it has an altruistic approach, thinking about others. So she met Miran just by watching his players. She approached him, and people exchanged pleasantries and brief histories. And then through that, the names Clayton Stanley and Chad Clark came up. She simply said, "Well, I played college tennis," and she's certainly very, very humble. And it's like, "Do you know who? Do you know so and so?" Actually, there was a player who I think he was a year before them or a year after them. You'd have to help me with my timetable, but I wish we had coached Scott Stewart. That's digressing. He wasn't somebody that we coached in the juniors day in and day out, but you, Craig Tiley, and I spent a semester working with him. What an amazing fighter. So we put a few short chapters together, and one link has the podcast I referred to with Nomina, because that's certainly an interesting story about tennis in Madagascar. Not only her childhood, but Dali and Ina. So, but we have a link to the second chapter that this rough that we started, and Nomina's daughter, Callie, hitting tennis balls. No, you had a chance to meet her when you came down here to help with our fundraiser. Yeah. And I know she's coming to Dallas with a group of kids here in a few days.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And, the wow factor, she's very good. She's obviously a junior player, and I think her family or parents really understand that. But when people watch her play, she has efficient ball striking skills. And, she was recently successful. She won the national 14s. So I think kids regulating kids and having people within our network. But, this is how this story unfolds. Another video I chose to put in this beginning of this rough draft is someone who trains at your club now, Mason Vaughn.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a film. We have many films. But we have a film of Mason and his father, Holt. Now, young junior, he grew up at the same time with Chad Clark and Clayton Stanley. But when he was a junior, he didn't know why they had a little bit of a competitive edge. But he found out that they hit the ball better. So along with his father, George, they came to see me in Memphis when we were helping with a nonprofit. But that tape, tennis parenting has to be a big part of this. And I think in the early years, a parent should be proactive. They don't have to actually participate on the court. We always say that if you can feed breadcrumbs to a pigeon, you can feed tennis balls. But to really become a student of the game, educate the consumer. So that's part of the story to start off. The next is to find Madagascar on the map. If you can find South Africa, you can find Madagascar. It's the fourth largest island in the world and the fourth poorest country in the world. But South Africa is a neighbor. So I contacted Raven Clausen. So we put together the short video of Raven doing it's actually the 42-second drill or the 48-second drill. If you only do one backhand volley, it's the 42-second drill. And that comes from Dennis Vandermeer's 6-second count. 1, 2, 3, go very, very slow. But if you do a one-handed backhand volley and a two-handed backhand volley and really young kids, that's what they should be doing. But Raven, he went all the way to Wimbledon. He came to us as a 17-year-old, almost 18, and had to rebuild his game. So that certainly helps the story with credibility. And if you've listened to these podcasts before, you know that we always say that credibility just means you're believable. It doesn't mean you're truthful. And then also Petrus Kukimore, I reached out to him. And he spent time at your club. He spent a lot of time with us. I remember he brought 25 South Africans to your club.
Yeah.
So I remember you asking me, you used to watch Petrus work for a minute or two and said, he's already spent a lot of time with you. I said, no. When you met him is when I met him. I met him a little sooner than you because I picked him up at the airport. So I guess I had a 30-minute head start. Maybe with Dallas traffic, an hour and 30 minutes. But
that was quick transfer of information.
So then, moving down the line, where to begin? We love to have form tournaments. And we show a form tournament, and it's with two advanced players. My son, Connor, and one of his coaches, Matt Clore. I've known Matt 20 years because he recruited my son, Connor, when he was 16, and now he's 36. And Matt's worked with us on a day-to-day basis. And coming back to the form tournament, certainly you need to train kids to be very, very athletic, but form has so much to do with tennis. There's no substitute for a good beginning. But also too, then Braden's definition, Vic Braden, our number one mentor with information, his definition of tennis for Vic was hitting targets. But Matt works with the Federation. He works with the USTA. So as we unfold this project, we're going to go very, very slow, make short videos. I'll make one in English, and then Patrick Jeffrion and Morin, who now is at Richmond Hill, originally from Montreal, speaks French. We'll go from the English to French. He'll be the translator. But we're going to go very, very slow. We have a mountain of information, and now with AI, it certainly can all be translated pretty quickly to French. But you got to listen to your critics. Someone once said about our content, it's like drinking from water from a fire hose. But if people have the time to really take a deep dive, we like to say it's a new line that 19.1 degrees is not a political consideration. Tennis teaching really shouldn't be political. Here are the facts. So, my son, Connor, he spent a lot of time at your place. His bio would read, he was ranked number 2 in the 18s nationally. He was an All-American, and he got to be 200 in the world. Matt Clore, my son Connor told me one time he took 4 sets in a row, or maybe 3 sets in a row from Matt. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know if Matt has slept the last few days because he's got at that time, he's got 4 children. I think at that time he had maybe 2 kids that were very, very young, and he's a guy even sleeping at night. But Clore was an excellent tennis player. He should have really tried to play pro tennis. Anybody who's watched him play or practice would know that. But they're having some fun. The people, it's in a small tennis camp, people observing, but it's a powerful tape. But I do think family versus federation. So this is going to be orchestrated through a federation, but it needs to go to the family. Everything we talk about on these podcasts, the attitude of the household.
Yeah.
And in the last chapter, we have a film of Craig Tiley, who you were with me 8 years. You had autonomy with those 2 clubs you were running in a neighboring town, and he was there 7 years. That's a long time. But on the tape, we just say, here's a guy who was very, very successful, as a college tennis coach. He took a team from Illinois from obscurity where they won the national championship. In fact, we have all sorts of film of Tiley with his team. I had recommended that he follow me at a program over in Tokyo, Chiba. And, it's people you would know, Stolt, Wilson, doing very basic exercises, drop hitting ball, shadow swing in front of a mirror. And fundamentals stand the test of time. Now, obviously, Tiley, now he's the incoming CEO of the USTA, so obviously he's a guy who can step up to the challenge, but the title I'm using for him is the guardian of the game. But anyway, that's an overview of the project. I think it should become very powerful and fact-based instruction for long-term development. But anyway, what's your comment on it? I know I've talked to you about it briefly, but why don't you make a few comments and we'll take.
Yeah, well, I think it's like you said, whoever is leading the charge has to be all in. And you can't really say the word mandate, I guess, but it has to be a very clear message that, we're going forward and we're going this direction, because people, find the easy way out, and there really isn't one, but they're just going to keep searching for it. And, in the letter, the simple yet powerful mission to help everyone play and teach tennis better and really make tennis more affordable. I just got off the phone with the family, and I could tell that, they were South Florida, and the resources certainly aren't a problem. But that message that I was trying to send to them is that you just can't keep writing checks. It's not about that. They needed a better GPS for their tennis direction. And I think that's what the GreatBase, whether it's through a federation like Madagascar, that's going to be, definitely have a huge leg up in the process if they follow the pathway, or whether it's just an individual family trying to help their child. It's just a GPS that you're not going to go too far off the track. You're not going to miss too many exits along the way. You're going to eventually get to a destination that is very close or further than you even thought you could get to. So, to me, that's what it is. It's a blueprint. It's a map. It's a plan that's based on something significant and something that can be validated, not just a whimsical course. And that's why I think it's so important.
Many years ago, Well, at one time I did a little work with the Irish Tennis Federation, but even before that, I had a number of meetings with the director. This goes back to early 80s. At that time in Ireland, there was only 2 indoor courts in the whole country. John Taylor. And, he asked if I would consider becoming the national coach. At that time, I don't even think they had a national coach. And, certainly I would have had to go over and make money through the private sector. And I was thinking that this would be right up my alley. A bit, what goes on with from one country to the next. I think in so many ways, tennis is, to be nice, it's standing still or it's going backwards from a technical standpoint and from a teaching standpoint. Let me say this, with a book, this could be a book. I'll read off the title and why don't you elaborate? Vic Braden is missed and Vic Braden was missed.
Yeah. Are you talking about a hypothetical title?
Yeah, hypothetical title. Vic Braden is missed and Vic Braden was missed. I think he was missed. And even though
I think it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
Yeah, even though he was on TV and, sold so many books and videos and yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I mean, that would be, that's very well said. He is missed and was missed is a no-brainer because if Vic Braden had a greater influence, and certainly he deserved it, but if he were to influence the world of tennis teaching more, Zverev wouldn't have went 10 years on the tour before starting to alter his toss. The people in the tennis world wouldn't just be now kind of realizing, hey, you really don't want that thing launched up into the clouds. But at the same time, not a day goes by that I'm not in conversation with somebody trying to convince them that you don't want to play with the wrist as you lead into the tennis ball. So I'm amazed at how, I think it's just human nature. People pick and choose, and things that are a little uncomfortable to accept. I think that it's just easier for them to, stick with the old. And again, Bradenism, the pain of change is greater than the pain of losing. And I think that when it comes to coaching, it's really hard. I was lucky when I bumped into you and, myself and many others that I was lucky I was young enough and was able to, realize I knew nothing and, to accept that. But I think when you're a 30-year veteran, I really admire somebody that's been at it a long time. To hear Dave Getz on the podcast and say that he, had to reroute to a 2-ended backhand, and to hear that story was really cool for somebody at his stage with his credentials already. And I think that's where it gets tough. So, they're going to have their challenges in Madagascar because there are going to be veterans who may not be as quick to, I hate to say buy off because it makes it sound like a scam, but to adopt some of the proven principles because they may have been doing it contrary to that throughout most of their teaching life.
Yeah, with, Tennis Ireland years ago, or same thing, I had an opportunity where I, for a number of reasons, didn't accept it. So they were going to hire a national coach for Puerto Rico. And it's not easy. Think about leading a nation, to try to make an impact on tennis teaching. How inexpensive it is to reach people via the internet. That's a good and a bad thing. But I've been talking to Dave Fish quite a bit here lately where, at first he asked me to work with his tennis camp staff, and it ended up being a project that we did for 12 years. I remember going 5 years in a row to train the tennis camp staff. And I said, I've done quite a bit of that where I go places and I train the staff. And I said, it's a little bit like sugar on sugar cereal. Is there needs to be more than, that hour and a half. I mean, it's great for people to go to a conference, get inspired. And, certainly do they get informed? Yes, indeed. But when it really comes down to learning how to bring up a tennis player just so they can have fun rallying, let alone, taking it even further and becoming a competitive player. Yeah, I think the expression 19.1 degrees is not a political consideration. I don't think many people, unless they really have made a study of Braden's contributions, would know that 19.1 degrees, that's how wide the tennis court is. You're playing singles and you get in the corner down the line versus cross court. And, then you see these super athletes, and hats off to the players that make it to the level where they're entertaining us on TV in big stadiums. That, like, say, for example, the follow through. It's you talk about lost art. Is that the follow through is not part of the equation anymore? People are misinterpreting the recovery as a follow through. But anyway, what other comments do you have on this?
I think it's a great cause. I think that, I've always believed in something beginning this point of origin and then rippling outward. So my hope would be that, number one, it is really a success in Madagascar, and in 10 years, tennis has really been impacted in an incredible way there. And then number two, that other places would, allow it to ripple out into their environment and start asking questions. And I don't think it would take 10 years. I mean, cultures can change fairly quickly if the people at the top are pushing hard enough. And I think I get a lot of, like you do, you probably get more, but I have people come and they want to build a club or buy it, begin an academy and this and that. And the first thing I tell them is, have you identified the person that, is going to work 7 days a week for 2-3 years and 16, 18 hours a day? And, they're always wanting to do it within the GreatBase system. And because they're worried about things, the steps that are further down the line, but it's a lot of work and somebody's going to have to really push it through. And I hope they have the right people in place to push it through.
Well, I think Dally, with what she accomplished, through Madagascar, being able to play at the international stage, I mean, that's so important. But I think a program to be information based is very, very lost.
Yeah,
I think that, I've been through the Spanish program several times, and with that, was it information based or is it based on players? I think that if you're on the inside, I think it was very the Spanish system very sound. But I think on the outside, it's like, well, they're looking at the end product. You're looking at world-class tennis players, and I think that it's important to do that. You got to look at it from both ends. But I think it's more like, how are the beginners progressing? Braden, you're going to measure a program by how the worst player in the program plays. The kid who takes the ice cream cone and puts it in the middle of their forehead. The kid who goes to the water fountain and they can't get the water to hit their lips at first. Can you teach that kid to play? I think there's way too much of the third base coach, the consultant coach. I either want to coach somebody who's about to score or coach somebody who's already scored. But no, I think that I think it's a good way to approach this instead of just like, okay, another Instagram post. I mean, everybody and their brother is putting out Instagram posts, and here's a serious step. So with Patrick, I mean, it has to start very basic where, okay, we have to teach people how to throw. We have to teach people how to catch, and teach people how to run. Just basic throwing, running, catching skills. Because then they can become a human ball machine. And you don't really need a fancy tennis court. You don't need a expensive membership. You need to find a way to practice. And, I think also to coming up as an athlete first, where you can do all sorts of things to work on mobility. That comes up all the time: mind, mobility, mechanics. and not instant gratification. For the longest time, they used TA, so many great people, so many great causes, but this play to learn is the right way and learn to play is the wrong way, but you need to really do both. You really need to do both. The game-based training is totally taken over. There's really very, very little form-based training. And, people actually see it, when people visit your place, they'll see static balance and they haven't seen it before. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a unicorn.
But anyway, listeners, that's the brief on that. Again, we have thousands and thousands, really, hundreds and hundreds. But I would say we could say, all right, we have at least 2,000 archive videos, especially if we got into all the documented athletes that visited over the years. And just to say, okay, well, let me just pick a handful of videos. We covered the form tournament, the target tournament, studying tennis, a parent being on the court, going through the checkpoints, and the critics. What do the critics say? Well, you're teaching everybody the same. The strength of the individual will come out. There will always be individuality. The alphabet's a system. This is A, this is the sound and the shape. We're going to agree, and then we're going to move on to B. The numerical system. A system is an organized plan. As you know, you were part of it. We learned a great deal from the late Peter Burwash.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to teach form. We're going to teach understanding. So that was a Peter theme. We're going to teach form. We're not going to teach understanding. And I used to tell all the students, I said, don't debate Peter Burwash or his staff. Just sit back, take notes, ask questions. Don't ask any I gotcha type questions. But then we could just flip it and say, well, the Burwash theme was we're not going to teach form, we're going to teach understanding. But said what we're going to try to do is get people to understand form. And, it's not just a play on words. You do need to approach it from both ends. There's no judge. You win because in the drop hit contest, you have better technique. You have to be able to, put it all together. There's a history to it. I think, I think if Chad Clark had played longer than 9 months, I think that he would have been a successful pro. But they were just, two college tennis players. But Nomina, being, inquisitive, like how were they trained? Connection to Matt Clore was an excellent player, but he made changes in his game. We first worked with him, with, Tiley being successful, Mason Vaughn, it's just, both Mason and Callie having number one rankings in their respective countries. Obviously that doesn't put them on top of the tennis world, but, people can just, if they were to look at it, coming back to Braden again, can you hit all the shots, singles and doubles, any part of the court, any surface? And, people aren't even really being taught how to volley. How long is a kid going to go before they can knock off an overhead? And I get myself in trouble, but, the light at the end of the tunnel, many, many times, it's a train coming right at the kid. But the sooner they get a dose of fact-based instruction for long-term development, the better.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, listeners, that's a short podcast. Yeah. Madagascar Tennis, Project Tennis Madagascar with GreatBase Tennis. But thanks for listening.
Yeah, have a great night.